Good evening. This is a regular meeting of the Princeton Planning Board. It's Thursday, June 21st, 2018, and the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the 2018 agenda resolution of the regularly scheduled meetings of the Planning Board of Princeton. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board at the Princeton Municipal Complex and is to be maintained throughout the year, and by transmitting a copy of such schedule to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, The Times, Trentonian, Comcast Media, and by filing a copy thereof with the Clerk of Princeton on the 7th day of December 2017. Legal notice on the adoption of said resolution appeared in the December 15, 2017 edition of the Princeton Packet. Carrie, would you call the roll, please?
Here.
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 Here. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Texarney has just arrived.
And Mr. Cohen.
And Mr. Cohen. So, yes. All right. The next item on the agenda is the findings of fact. This is Anthony Paleo, and this is from a May 14th meeting of the Subdivision Committee. It was 403 Basin Street, Lot 11503, Lot 1. And
I am. I don't know what it is.
is this on? The light's
Hello?
green.
Hello?
It's better. Testing.
Okay.
Testing.
Testing. Is it on?
I think we're on. He just needs to turn it up.
Okay. I can't get any closer than this.
Yeah.
Right. So this was a subdivision committee meeting, and those who were present were myself, Louise Wilson, and Dwayne Williamson, and we are the ones who are eligible to vote on this. Are there any additions, corrections, anyone? So I guess I'll ask Louise to make a motion on this, and then I'll...
So moved.
And I second that, and I gather we're both in favor of it.
Aye.
Aye.
Let's do one change.
Mr. Porter has a change he'd like to make.
Coming up next will be there's a little memo that related to Spring Street and the condition regarding performance guarantee. That same language should be inserted in paragraph 9 here.
Of the Paleo
Yes.
thing. Do you want to...
Yeah. Why don't we look at the memo from Jerry on Nelson Glass concerning performance guarantees need to be in accordance with the new amendments to the municipal land use law and subject to an ordinance that is adopted locally consistent with those changes. And that ordinance is not yet in effect. So this performance guarantee language would be subject to the municipal land use law limitations and the implementation by a local ordinance. So whatever language we're putting into or is proposed to be put into the amendment to Nelson Spring Glass would be the new paragraph 9 here.
Okay, that would be new paragraph 9 of Paleo. Is that right?
Correct.
And it's also going to be...
We're coming up as an amendment in spring.
Okay, and
Oh, look
What's going on?
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on.
yeah. Can't hear me either, right?
I can't
Yeah.
hear you.
I think I'm right on. It's the mic or the sound system. I can't get any closer.
Well,
But you can.
you could move. You could move up to the front row if you want to hear. Um, Great. Thank you. Did you want to discuss now that there was a discussion item, the Nelson Glass memo? No, we do not. Louise, do you want to amend your motion on the Paleo findings?
Oh, is it subject to the same performance
You want to
guarantee
get-
thing?
yeah.
Yes, move it, I'll move it as amended to reflect the current state of the municipal land use law.
Okay, and I will second that, and
Aye.
aye. Okay. Now, Mr. Porter.
We had a hearing on the Nelson Spring LLC application, and subsequent to the adoption of the findings, there was a request to amend the performance guarantee provision so that it conforms with the authority that is now available to us, which is that there needs to be a municipal ordinance implementing the changes to the land use law. And as I understand it, that ordinance is in the works but has not been adopted, so that the requirement for just imposing a requirement for performance bond is not within our power. Since that was not discussed as part of the findings or the hearing, there is now a hearing on this subject to amend the findings to modify that language. And you have that in a memorandum from Mr. Mueller with the findings.
Okay. Are there any board questions about this? You've all had a copy of Jerry Muller's memo on this, and so I.
Was that? I'm not sure that finding was adopted.
I thought it was. I don't know either.
Yeah,
I can't tell from this.
1 second.
Yeah, I'm not exactly clear whether we're deleting section Y, whether we are suggesting new wording for section Y, for paragraph Y, or, I mean, I realize the current paragraph Y is unenforceable, so do we just
Well, we just
leave it out?
if authorized under the municipal land use law and a ordinance consistent with it, the performance then go on to the rest of that requirement. So it's still in there, but it's subject to a local ordinance being adopted consistent with the land use law.
No, I'm still not clear.
So this is a change of wording.
Correct.
Using the wording you've just, can you hear me on this outlined? The wording you've just used is going to be substituted now?
Yes.
In that case, I would move approval.
Well, let's just make sure that we had adopted this in the first place.
Is this your application?
Is this it?
attorney?
I don't know.
No. It's the
Okay, so I don't know whether, anybody remember whether this was adopted before?
Do we remember what?
No.
I'm sorry.
I don't believe it was.
Has this already been adopted as a?
so, but I could be wrong.
I had to recuse from the last meeting, so I don't know whether Nelson was on the last meeting agenda, but I don't believe we've approved the findings of fact for Nelson
I don't think so
Glass.
either.
Oh, you do?
It says that.
Yes, you're adopting the findings with that modification.
No?
Apparently, this request for a change in the language held up the adoption of the findings until we could have a hearing, and we're now having a hearing, so this is actually a motion to adopt the findings with the modified language in section Y.
Okay.
In that case, I move approval of that.
The findings with the changes in
Second.
section Y. Is that a second?
Yes.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? Why don't you just call the roll since this is a correction? No, we
say.
didn't.
On the
Okay, it was,
on page 12 of the findings.
Yes.
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 Yes?
yes. Okay. That brings us to the hearings for this evening. The first item on the agenda is 303 Witherspoon Street LLC. This is a major site plan. It's block 7102, lot 5. And Chris Costanza is going to be the planner for this, so
Madam Chair, might I have a moment?
yes.
My name's Chris. My name's Chris Tarr. I represent the applicant. There are a couple of neighbors here. They got some misinformation. If it was acceptable to the board to let the next application go first, we wanted to go in the side room and be sure that we had shared the proper information with our folks. Save some time for the board, I think.
Any comments, objections? Shall we? All right, then.
Who's the attorney?
Sounds like a great idea.
Wait a minute, let's, I think. Okay, is the
Yeah.
attorney for the next application, is he? Right. Okay. And Chris, if you want to switch gears and go to the next one, you're not doing this one.
Actually, Chris didn't review this one, so I guess I can give a quick synopsis.
That would be great.
This is for a two-lot conforming minor subdivision at the intersection of Cherry Valley and Great Road. The existing lot is it's almost 11 acres. The requirement, it's in the RA zone. It's required 4-acre zoning. So they're creating two new lots. One is 6.87 acres, and the second will be 4 acres. There is an existing home on lot 1.02 that will remain. A new home will be built on lot 1.01. As I said, everything is conforming. If you, looking at the at staff's memo, There are a lot of wetlands and stream crossings with this. It does qualify for general DEP permits. They will have to get those, obviously, before they build anything here. Just some of the comments in our memo.
Jack, before you get to that, we need to swear you in.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm sorry,
I
I
gotta
was
start over?
diverted.
If you
So,
want to.
Mr. West, do you affirm or swear to tell the truth and to confirm that you've already been telling the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
So the first recommendation from staff is to change the name of Great Road to Basin. Obviously, you found the typo in our memo. I apologize for that. Lot 101 will be 1287 Great Road, and Lot 102 will be 1267 Great Road. Again, all the utilities should be underground. We're asking that the applicant's engineer submit a certification that the septic system on the existing lot is adequate. The concern there is that you approve a subdivision and then the septic system is failing on the existing, for the existing house. Again, we would ask that there be a conservation easement encompassing all the wetlands and transition areas, and also transition area averaging must be approved by DEP. We want the engineer to submit calculations verifying that there's 2 proposed stream crossings with a 15-inch culvert, and we just want to make sure that they have adequate capacity to handle the runoff. Again, they would propose post-performance guarantees and inspection fees for anything done within the municipal right-of-way, and again, that's in accordance with the new municipal land use law. And they do need a general permit 10A from DEP, transition area averaging and stream encroachment for the 2 stream crossings. They need Mercer County Planning Board, Mercer County Soil, and then NJDEP. And that's essentially it. Again, conforming, no real big issues here.
And also your item number 13, site review.
Yes, obviously for any new house, they would have to submit a plot plan for review.
Okay, Ms. Ullman?
Yeah, that lot is at the top of the ridge in a really complicated environmental zone. I wondered about the requirement to put all the utilities underground. Isn't that more disruptive to the terrain than to install them above ground? I can understand why you might want to do that in the middle of a town, but I wondered if it's just a routine thing to require, or if it makes sense in a situation like this to do the money. I don't know
Well,
the answer,
the
so-
intent would be that it would follow the driveway, so it's an area that's already disturbed. You're right, you make a point that, is it really necessary out here? It is a standard condition for any new house that the utilities, and obviously we're talking about electric, telephone, and cable, that they be underground. And again, it would follow the driveway, so I don't see this as more of a environmental impact.
And remember that other utilities absolutely have to be underground, water and gas, things like that. So if you're excavating to put those in anyway, within the area of disturbance, you'll be able to put the electrical as well.
Okay.
I had a question about, does this lot have the sidewalk going along on Cherry?
No, I don't believe there's any sidewalk anywhere out there.
I thought that we had planned for a sidewalk in the new work on the road out there. No?
I'm trying to, if this was
I know there's a shared side path along.
on the
Oh,
section
this
that the
part of
town
the
is going to
Great
be
Road.
doing, there is a shared path that's part of that.
Is that,
I wasn't sure if the limits of that work came down this far.
Right around where
it's
Grace
about
It does,
300
but
feet
it may be intended to be extended. I don't remember the detail of the master
Yeah, I'm not
plan.
that familiar with those plans.
Excuse me. Could you describe the lines? Those aren't contours. Those are stream lines, or what?
So there's quite a, this dash line here, so this whole center area, with the exception of a little bit of uplands here, so kind of the whole center is, and wrapping all around is all wetlands. The only uplands are the area up here where the proposed house is, a piece in the middle, and then a piece over here off a Great Road is uplands.
So that driveway would have to go through a number of wetlands?
Yes. And based on there's different types of permits. And a general permit, if you're under a certain square footage of wetlands and wetlands transition area disturbance, it qualifies as a general permit. And that's relatively
common.
Nothing's easy to get with DEP, but it's a relatively routine permit. If you exceed that square footage, then you're into an individual permit, and that's very complicated to get.
Jack, I apologize if I missed this somewhere in the report, but if this is a conforming minor subdivision, why was it decided not to have it heard by this subdivision committee and referred to the full board?
I'm not sure I can answer that. Yeah, I'm not sure what the justification was that it was sent to the full board.
Who justified it?
I don't know. I had the same question, but my speculation was that for scheduling purposes, it was easier to be put on this agenda than to convene a meeting of the subdivision committee.
The last
to
couple
be-
of minor subdivisions that were conforming have been coming to the full board. There was an issue with one a couple of years ago. So I think most of them have been coming here. I don't know if, I'm assuming that's the reason, but I don't know 100% for sure.
I don't know either.
We have jurisdiction. That's not an issue.
That's correct.
If I may, it may be the existing home does have a pre-existing nonconformity as to the side yard setback. Perhaps
Yeah.
that was what kicked it over?
Can I swear you in as well? Do you swear or affirm to tell truthfully?
I do.
Tell the truth as
I do.
during
So,
this hearing?
Ryan Kennedy, I'm attorney for the applicant.
Right, I think,
I'll point to,
just a minute, did you have anything else you wanted to
Nothing else that I have, unless there's any other questions.
Bridger?
No, but an existing non-compliance is not grounds for a variance on a new subdivision. That's,
So this is a conforming application.
That's
There is a
correct.
pre-existing nonconformity into the side yard, but it doesn't require board action. I
That's-
think it may have been more a scheduling issue. It may have been someone's decision that it was a large enough subdivision with wetlands involved that the board should be aware of it and should hear it. But I think that probably Ms. Catronio and Mr. Solo were involved in that, neither of whom is able to talk to us.
We can
tonight.
blame Lee because he's not here.
Anyway, thank you very much. Let's hear from the applicant now. If we can swear both of you in.
I guess
if I could
Mr.
swear us in at
Kennedy
the same
was.
time, sure.
Yes, gentlemen, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this application? Just state your name for the record.
Again, Ryan Kennedy,
Kevin Baracco, Princeton Junction Engineering.
thank you. Madam Chairwoman, Ryan Kennedy from Stevens and Lee on behalf of the applicant. Jack had it right. This is a conforming subdivision for schedule purposes or whatever the reason we are here before you. The one thing, so we do have our engineer from Princeton Junction. To the extent you have any questions, I do think we should, at least since it was referred to, and it's slightly different from the plans in your package, or at least relabeled that we mark Planning Board Exhibit A, though it is essentially again, the conditions that were set by staff are acceptable to the applicant, many of which are engineering items that we'll work with staff post approval, should it be granted. One thing I'll ask our engineer to just confirm of the, this is quite into the weeds and ministerially, but of the three staff listed pre-existing nonconformities, I believe there was an updated plan as to one of them. Kevin, if you want to take the board through that.
Item in the zoning chart, the building setback to height ratio is for the proposed and the existing is 1.61, not 2.06. But it's conforming. I think that's the only one.
So it's still non-conforming, but not as
That's
non-conforming.
correct. It's not particularly relevant since it's not, but we just wanted to correct the record for that. So that's essentially it. To the extent you have questions for our engineer, happy to have him answer them for you.
I'm sorry, did you say what you marked as Exhibit A1 is different from the plan we have?
It is. It's
Could-
just a modification of the minor subdivision plan showing the proposed dwelling and driveway.
Okay. So, but the subdivision part of it is the same.
It's all the same.
So, in fact, that layout is not part of our approval. So that's an exhibit telling us how you propose it when it comes to building on that lot to site the house and driveway.
Let's call it a conceptual. Your professional was asked to show a house with some grading, so just so you get an idea that it actually can work on the site. Just to be clear, I did have a meeting with DEP on this matter prior to submission, just to go over, make sure, it's a possibility we can get through them, and they were encouraged with that. We won't need.
Excuse me, they were what?
They're in agreement that what we're proposing will fit the general permit rules. We will not need the stream encroachment, and that again will be part of the application to DEP, because we have less than 50 acres contributing area in the floor. So it doesn't fall under their jurisdiction.
Can I just ask about the pond? Is it a natural pond or is it dammed up?
I believe so. I can't, is that a natural pond?
It's been there a long time,
Yes.
but it's simply
Well kept.
a spring rather than a dammed up stream. Is that right?
Yeah, the actual overflow comes.
I mean, those are all branches of Cherry Brook, but
Correct. Yeah, Cherry Brook, this is a tributary, and it's in starts to fit out.
I'm sorry, did you say you don't need two stream encroachments?
We don't. They wanted us to verify that, and we did an area calculation of the contributing area to, actually, when we to this down to the point of culvert, and it was less than 50 acres, so it doesn't fall under their jurisdiction.
So,
We certainly size the culverts in accordance with the professional request.
but to the extent this indicates that you will be obtaining two stream encroachment permits that should be removed?
Yeah, or we'll just verify it, that's all. We'll just get, DEP
Well-
required.
How about we add if necessary?
I was going to say,
That
you
would be
can just
perfect.
put
Thank
if
you.
required.
I'm just curious. I mean, I know that this is getting into like more of the site plan and the layout of the design of the driveway and the house, but I'm just curious, if there's plans to like clear cut the whole entire area around the driveway, because from what I understand, that whole entire set is forested. Is that correct?
It's wooded. But we're gonna have to comply with DEP, so it's not a situation where we'll be able to kind of weave the driveway in and out through trees. We're gonna keep the clearing down to a minimum.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it would just be around where the driveway
That's
is.
correct. Right.
And I mean, I'm just curious why, I mean, I know that it's nice to have that long driveway and kind of a destination at the end, but like, couldn't the house be moved closer?
It would not fit up in this area, and we did not get a passing perk test or soil testing. Soil testing is up here.
So that was the only place that you could build a house?
That's correct.
What about in the middle, the upland area in the middle?
And here,
Well, I guess to the right a little bit.
this wall, this uplands area wouldn't support a house. It's not.
That wouldn't support it. Okay, that's interesting.
It's also that upland area is completely within the corridor. It's not really, I mean, it may be a little bit higher than the rest, but the stream corridor completely envelops that upland area.
Right.
And the site is extremely constrained environmentally. It's just, very much mostly wet, just soaking wet. And that's a concern that I have, that the plan that we have shows the driveway, including the circular part of the driveway, encroaching well into the wetlands buffer area, and that there's a proposed buffer area to be removed / mitigated, which doesn't look nearly as large as the wetlands buffer area to be added. And so, I mean, all of this is just to say, that's just very uncomfortable. I realize we don't have the ability to say, don't build this house here, but I do wonder whether you could use a shared driveway, whether there's any kind of note or condition we can put in our approval, since it's a conforming application, to minimize, to not intrude on the wetlands buffer areas, to have a modest footprint rather than a really great big old house right on top of the wetlands virtually, and otherwise just try to signal to DEP our concern about the environmental integrity of this property.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I think that was a question for the applicant.
Well, I know we looked
Whether we
into
would-
a shared driveway, but the downside is that shared driveway would come up through here, right in front of the set, right behind the existing house.
And that would potentially,
Yep.
yeah, and that driveway is within the side yard setback, so we would be having the conforming lot then kind of tack on to the existing nonconformity of that parking and driveway for lot 102. So I don't know if there's a
Yes, but
conforming
you
way
would-
that
you would
lot
have a
101 could use that.
much smaller environmental impact by not cutting a road through the entire rest of the property. I'm just saying. So I guess it was partly a question to the applicant, what assurances, if any, are you willing to give about keeping the house out of the wetlands buffer area and absolutely minimizing the pavement that goes through it, both the wetlands and the wetland buffer area. And then a question to our own council, what do we have the latitude to do within the action that we take to, what leverage do we have, what signals can we give to DEP to make sure that they look at this real carefully?
Well, I'm sure DEP has some of the same concerns when they review it, but to the extent that we are imposing condition 13, or item 13 in the memo, which calls for the municipal engineer to review the site plan, I guess we can add language to that, asking that the engineer be sensitive to the wetland intrusions and minimize, to the extent that it's consistent with the use of the property, the encroachments. I, th- I think in terms of greatly changing the plan that's otherwise a conforming plan, we are subject to limitations. So I think it's a difficult lot. I guess that's why it stayed 11 acres until now, until they were able to find a place for percolation and a way of accessing it through the wetlands. So it's, staff tells us it's conforming. I think we can express our concern through the site plan review that staff will perform, again, subject to the limitations of DEP. I mean, they can't usurp DEP, but we can certainly make it clear that there's concern about the wetlands as to the siting of the house and the driveway and the utilities.
Does the Canal Commission also have jurisdiction here? That might have been noted
pretty
in a
far.
memo. DNR Canal Commission?
Yeah,
They don't, as long as we don't go to a quarter of an acre.
I see, okay.
Impervious, I should be clear.
Well, it seems like there are at least a couple of things we could tag on to that item 13. One being, we've already discussed minimizing the area of disturbance along the driveway, and to ask that Jack review that carefully when the site plan comes in, the boundaries of the area of disturbance. And the other thing that I think is important on this site is the potential for light pollution and disturbance of habitat. You know, so I don't know what we have in the ordinance, but if we can, you know, ask for shielded light fixtures and no floodlights and stuff like that, I would certainly think that would be appropriate in this setting.
I don't believe there's anything in the ordinance for a single-family home that would prohibit a floodlight, you know, in the backyard or something.
Maybe we can ask the applicant if they'd be willing to.
I'm having trouble hearing you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was saying maybe we could ask.
Resonating.
Oh. Maybe we could ask the applicant if they're willing to not put up floodlights.
Just to clarify, would it, a set of conditions that would be similar to perhaps we might see before we might agree if we were before the zoning board of adjustment, the not being able to see the bulb or the source of the light from a neighboring property or the right of way, something to that effect, or just are you asking for a blanket, no floodlight? Short answer is
Yeah,
I think we'd
because
be
the concern I
amenable
have
to-
is for habitat, not for neighbors, so it's
Okay.
a slightly different situation. You know, light pollution can be really harmful to certain animals, that it disturbs their daily cycle and stuff like that. I'm not saying there couldn't be any lights, but I think floodlights would be a problem from that standpoint. I don't know. I mean, Jack's saying that there's nothing in the ordinance that really allows us to impose that, but I'd ask if the applicant be willing to consider not putting floodlights.
It's a good point, because that's a very richly diverse, biodiverse area, and there's vernal pools and spring peepers and all sorts of wonderful creatures that are especially sensitive.
Right. On the other hand, this is going to be a house that's fairly isolated, and
Yeah.
I would think that the people who live there would want to have a certain amount of lighting, just for safety reasons. You know?
It is quite, I hesitate to use the word desolate, because they're going to be marketing this at some point. No, they'll use that in their marketing materials. But it is isolated. Certainly, I think a buyer or a homeowner would expect to have them in their driveway as they approach. I don't know if there's something in between a prohibition or, but ultimately with the positioning of this, some kind of light's going to be needed. Sure, should we have them sworn in? This is the applicant here.
Yes. I'm going to ask, to the extent you're providing testimony, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully?
Yeah, I do. I
Would
do.
you state your name and come close to the microphone, maybe?
Oleg Chebataryov is my name, and I'm applicant for this subdivision. And I just wanted to add, because I do live in the existing house, and sometimes you need lights for safety, and particularly when it's wet and near the garage, when you come out from the garage, like in the morning. So I will ask your permission. Not of course, and I'm very, a habitat is very important, and I'm trying not to disturb it, but support and everything in my existing house. But just for safety reasons, I will ask for like just limited amount at least of lights, so we can make sure that will not provide the dangerous situation
So
when we're getting out of the
maybe
house.
just in the driveway area,
Driveway,
not
yeah, exactly.
not the back of the
No,
house
no,
or
no,
anything
not
like that.
any artificial lights, but yeah. Is that, thank you. Mhm.
So did we come on to any resolution with the driveway? Is it not possible to have a shared driveway? Is that?
It wouldn't be possible without creating a variance condition.
I think it's possible. I think what they're saying is it's not practical.
Well, I guess there's a question of whether it's reasonable in terms of the area and the design to, on this. We have to act reasonably, so.
Yeah, I'm just curious whether it was yes or no. I mean, I've seen other shared driveways in these types of, suburban types of kind of desolate conditions.
They usually break off long before they reach the existing well. They usually branch off this way and come out through it.
Mm.
And that is just not possible. That would cause more disturbance.
Well, I that's totally understandable.
You were thinking from coming around behind, kind of.
That's what I was
Yeah,
thinking, but I mean, I understand that would be kind of an inconvenience to the existing homeowner.
That's quite close.
I guess, I mean, I don't know if the applicant would be amenable to having like impervious pavement or some sort of lighter type of, or more ecologically friendly type of pavement that, would not create more storm runoff, possibly. I know that that's
I
not.
think at time of the plot plan, we could explore some of those options.
They're going to have to meet the stormwater ordinance, so
Right.
that very well may be the solution is
Right.
porous pavement for the driveway.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Did you have anything more you wanted to add?
And that's it, thank you. Well, I'll reserve, I don't believe we'll have any, but to the extent there's any comments from the public, I'll just reserve afterwards.
I'm not sure what you said, just.
I said I'd just like to reserve final comments in the event that we have comments from the public. I don't expect them based on who was here before, but
Okay. Shall we move to the public session and see if there's anyone here who'd like to speak to this application? Anyone for this application? Anyone there? I gather that your neighbors were notified, but they live fairly far from you. All right, hearing none, let me close the public portion. And board, any further discussion?
Just clarification.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Porter.
Yeah, we had a lot of back and forth discussion. I'm not sure I captured where we landed on some of these issues. We do want the applicant and the engineer in the process of reviewing the site plan to make decisions which minimize the areas of disturbance. And if someone could summarize for me where you think we wound up on the lighting issue. Do you understand that, Jack? Or Derek?
Well, I think it's not to have floodlights, coming out the back. They can have lights for the garage area. And I don't know if we came to a conclusion on the driveway itself, because it's such a long driveway through the woods. They may want some type of lighting, but I don't know if any conclusion was there, and
Yeah,
maybe just
I think
allow some type of bollard lighting.
what I felt we had agreed to was to limit lighting to the areas of the driveway, and not, the rear of the house. So that would be acceptable to me, that there could be.
Just to repeat that, not floodlights and lighting in the back, but
Right.
lighting at the driveway for safety purposes.
But it would be limited to a bollard type lighting. We've had people come in that want big lights down their driveway. Yeah.
Airplane lights.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, and the application is, the request is minor subdivision approval for these two lots, subject to the conditions set forth in the memo, with the understanding that the submitted application, to the extent it showed how the siting and location on the new lot, that was conceptual, and the plans we saw in Exhibit A1 are still conceptual but different from what was submitted.
Anyone else? Yes, no? So these are the conditions as outlined by Mr. Porter. If there's no further discussion, I guess we want a motion on this.
I move to approve the subdivision application with.
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All right, would you call the roll on that one, please, Carrie?
Yes.
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 Thank you.
The house in this lot was right in the corner where the roads met. Yeah. But I guess probably they've, yeah, it is. I used to know people who lived there 40, 50 years ago. In the house where and I have a feeling that pond had a dam at one point rather than natural. Well, anyway. So.
A what? A birther?
Earth mover.
Oh, they said a birther.
I'm sure that they're ready to do something, but it's going to be fun. I'm sure that those residents. Are you talking about the oh, from the other side as opposed to going
Go off
to
where
Drake's corner?
he said you can go and say, I'll build a elevated road. So I noticed that there's, on that stretch, if you're coming from Surrey Valley up Province Line, there's this one mansion on the left that the owner calls Everlasting.
About ready?
Oh, right. But now it's a sale. So now
Yeah, I guess it's not so everlasting.
It sounds like, no, it sounds like sounds like that should be the name of the Sunrise development. It's like an end-of-life care thing.
Oh, right.
I don't know, that has
Yeah,
some sort of religious connotation, like into the everlasting eternal.
Right. That'd be kind of funny.
All right. Okay, this is the hearing for 303 Witherspoon Street, LLC. It's a major site plan. It's block 7102, lot 5. And I think, Mr. Costanza, this is your report this time, right? If you would.
Let me just, Ms. Phillips, would you confirm that the noticing has been submitted in the proper proof of publication? Thank you. Take jurisdiction.
Okay.
Mr. Cosenza, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this matter?
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to give my thanks to the community and to you giving the opportunity to serve the board. I'd also like to thank Derek, Jack, Carrie, and Eileen for helping me get up to speed. So this application before you is actually regarding a piece of property not too far from here. It is a interior lot located on the east side of Witherspoon Street. It has it's rectangular in shape with 50 feet of frontage along Witherspoon Street, 170 feet deep, in total 8,500 square feet. And in general location, as I mentioned, not far from here, it's located across the street from the Community Park Elementary School. Today, the site currently contains a 1.5-story single-family dwelling with a brick front. The property actually has a driveway on the left side of the property. It's actually shared with the property to the north, which is 305, 307 Witherspoon Street. At the rear of the property are several large trees, as well as a street tree within the Witherspoon public right-of-way. And surrounding the property are 2-story office buildings to both the north and the south, both with rear parking lots. And to the rear of the property to the east are single-family dwellings. And as I mentioned before, to the west across the street is the public school facility. So what the applicant proposes to do is to remove the dwelling and the driveway and seeks preliminary and final major site plan approval to construct a 3-story mixed-use building together with a rear parking lot similar to the other properties to the north and south, as well as the standard driveway, walkways, landscaping, lighting, and fencing. Now, regarding the building itself, I will pull these floor plans, which you should have in your packet. The building itself has a small office space, 400 square feet, on the first floor. Behind that is a bicycle storage room and access.
Chris, can I just interrupt?
Sure.
So if we're going to mark exhibits, is this your first exhibit, or was?
I will use the first exhibit as a site plan, which was page 5.
Okay.
Landscaping plan of the submitted site plan drawings. This exhibit, which is up before you now, will be exhibit B?
Well,
two?
PB2.
Okay.
So PB1 was from the plans A2? And PB2 is which plan, the architectural plan?
This is the architectural plan set prepared by Daniel A. Ward, the sheet A1.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the plans on the first floor feature a small office space, 400 square feet. Behind that is a bicycle storage room, which is generally accessible to the entire building. And there are also 3 2-story apartments. They each consist of 1,200 square feet of floor area. and each containing 2 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and their own basement. Now, we call them apartments, but in reality, they function more like townhomes, just stacked to each other side by side. But for the purposes of this review memorandum and the presentation, I'll refer them to as apartments. As I mentioned before, the apartments are back to back to back. The foremost apartment closest to the street sits on top of the office and the bicycle storage room, which gives the building the appearance of a 3-story building. I flipped over to sheet A2, which I'll mark as A3.
PB3.
So it's the foremost apartment that creates the appearance of a 3-story building. I believe there's no half-story definition in the ordinance, so for the purposes of this presentation, we'll call it a 3-story building. The remainder of the building actually is just a 2-story structure with small gable dormers, and it has a consistent ridge line at approximately 30 feet above grade throughout the entire structure from front to back. I'm going back to the first exhibit. The building is situated to the left side or the north side of the property with a 2-foot setback, or 1 feet if you consider the eave. On the right side is a driveway and a walkway leading to the rear parking lot. Underneath the parking lot will be a drywall system, and in the parking lot itself will be 8 parking spaces, one of which will be van accessible, handicap accessible space. There will also be some lighting, landscaping, and a new fence. I should note that the fence will be located on the right side and the rear. There's currently a fence on the left side of the property, actually I should say there's a fence on the neighbor's property which functions as their left side fence. So as noted in Jack and Derek's report, there's no variances, so the applicant does not need to provide any testimony regarding any bulk variances. But if any variances come up during the application, the applicant should be prepared to provide testimony to that effect. I'm moving on to section 5 of my report regarding parking and circulation. Regarding access, Jack and Derek did mention in their report that the applicant should be prepared to talk about shared driveway access as it is today, see if there's a way to continue that with the new development. It's my understanding that has been attempted, but I would encourage the applicant and the board to consider those actions. It doesn't have to be just limited to this one property. It can actually stretch among other properties all in this whole block. And the reason I bring that up because given the Princeton's complete streets policy, it's important that we can eliminate conflicts with pedestrians, really any users of all abilities, so that there's a safe passage to the municipal building, and especially across the street. There's a crosswalk to the school just north of this property. Again, the applicant should be prepared to discuss the potential for shared access as mentioned in the staff reports. Regarding the number of parking spaces for the required use, the ordinance requires 1 space for every 200 square feet of floor area for the office. Since there's 400 square feet, that divided by 200, it requires 2 parking spaces. The ordinance also requires 1 space for every half of a dwelling. In other words, 2 parking spaces for every dwelling unit, which is actually the same as RSIS, requiring 2 parking spaces for a 2-bedroom apartment. So when you have the 3 apartments requiring 2 spaces each, that requires a total of 6. When you add that with the 2 required for the office, this entire development requires 8 parking spaces, and they provide that on site. It's conforming. I should note that given the proposed mix of uses, that is when the office use is not being used at night, you have extra spaces available for the residential uses, so there's an opportunity for reducing parking in terms of its requirement and possibly reducing the need for providing a certain number of parking spaces. As for traffic generation, Jack and Derek mentioned that given the proposed uses, a really small office space and 3 2-bedroom apartments, there's really no significant increase in parking generation. However, because of the proximity to the school and driveways up and down, that represents additional conflicts, and that should be considered with the discussion over the shared parking. Regarding the parking lot layout, again, there's 8 parking spaces to the rear. There's 5 along the left side property line, one of which is van accessible, and 3 along the terminus of the driveway heading from Witherspoon Street. It's these 3 parking spaces at the terminus of the drive aisle that at 9 feet wide, 27 feet tall, that 27-foot dimension is actually driving, no pun intended, the width of this driveway. Typically, you only need 24 feet for a drive aisle, and in this case, given low traffic generation, you actually really don't need 24 feet. You can go less with a certain amount of comfort, and I'll defer to the engineer if that is practical. So one of the comments I raised in the report was that should the parking lot retain its current layout, that is having a driveway access to the rear parking lot, there may be an opportunity to reduce the width of the parking spaces at the terminus from 9 to 8 feet. That will reduce it to 24, which gives it a typical standard, or eliminate one space altogether. What this does is it allows you to reduce impervious coverage and improve the landscaping buffer along the side, actually both side lot lines. And regarding the parking lot stalls themselves, as noted by Jack and Derek, they recommend a variance be granted for the parking spaces themselves, 9 by 19. They're proposing 9 by 18, which is generally pretty standard. And it's my understanding that that variance is typically approved. And again, should the parking lot retain its current layout, the applicant may consider taking that extra foot that's being granted, if it is granted by the board, and use that to reduce impervious coverage and improve the landscaping buffer, especially on the left side lot line. Regarding bicycle parking, the applicant is proposing a bicycle storage room. That's great. And actually the size of the room is pretty large, but I just want to get some clarification from the applicant when they present their findings or responses to this letter is exactly how many spaces, or sorry, rather, how many parking bicycles can be accommodated at the site. It's a large room. I don't think it's a problem. Just want to get an idea of how many bicycles are being accommodated. Both the Environmental Commission and SPRAB recommended an exterior bicycle rack be provided. And regarding the disposal of waste, at the rear of the property is a fenced-in area with several waste containers, recycling, as well as air conditioning units. Regarding the fence enclosure for the waste containers themselves, just have a few questions that can be easily answered. Where is the gate located? Number two, how will the office personnel and residents access this fenced-in area? I raise this issue because a lot of the containers are jammed together. I'm not quite sure how exactly the personnel and residents are going to access each one, since it's a narrow area for the fence-in area. How often will the private hauler collect the containers, and how will they access this area? Regarding the public sidewalk, Jack and Derek recommend that it be replaced. And regarding these walkways, the walkway that exists now will be replaced with a new one, such that there will be access provided from the Witherspoon right-of-way and the porch along the building to the rear of the property. So there's access being provided throughout. And given the finished floor elevations, it's pretty low to the ground. It's my understanding that there's a pretty easy access for a handicap accessible use. And should the parking lot and driveway maintain this layout, SPRAB recommends that a sign be provided, soon to be at the front of the building to warn motorists, pedestrians utilizing the walkway and sidewalk. Regarding landscaping and lighting, number 6, there's a 26-inch tree at the rear of the property among the 5 trees. The 26-inch pin oak tree is actually dead, as indicated by the Shade Tree Commission. That tree will be removed regardless. It still requires 2 replacement trees. The remaining 4 are going to be protected, and it's recommended, as noted in various reports, that the trees be protected during construction. Should any additional trees be removed, they should be replaced as per ordinance. Regarding proposed landscaping, there's several trees, shrubs, and a series of ground cover plants and grasses. And SPRAB notes that the front yard area may be able to accommodate additional flowering tree, and in the case of any responses made to relocation of or removal of the driveway aisle, there actually may be opportunities to shift the building and add more landscaping on the left side of the property. Regardless of how we address the landscaping, ultimately the board's landscape committee should review the final landscaping plan. Regarding the fence itself that accommodates the enclosure for the waste receptacles and AC units, the engineering plans show a mostly solid but still open fence, picket style, 36 to 40 inches, 3 feet tall, and that's utilized to shield the devices and cans from view. Regarding building lighting, there's recessed lighting above the entrances. Recommendation that But my report is to add another recessed lighting just to balance the lighting overflow into the porch area for balance. And for site lighting, there will be a shoebox light pole in the middle of the parking lot along the right side property line that will be mounted at 14 feet high. And the recommendation by SPRAB is that a method be explored to control light, and that could be done through a timer or a sensor. Additionally, there should be clarification as to whether these will be the typical 60-watt bulbs or LED. The reports recommend using LED throughout. The question I have, just want to add to that, is to clarify, if you do use LED, what color temperature? Regarding stormwater, the current proposal as displayed, there will be an increase of 4,997 square feet, just under the 5,000 square foot limit. We've discussed various ways where that could be reduced. Ultimately, the approximately 5,000 is the worst case scenario. Underneath the parking lot is 3 dry wells where the outflow will connect to the rear alley and to an existing system. Various reports indicate that the preference is to the overflow be directed to the existing stormwater system within Witherspoon Street. And as recommended in various memoranda, consider the use of various areas for porous pavement. And finally, regarding signage, there's the 2 existing office buildings. They each have a modest freestanding sign. Nothing's been proposed as far as I can tell. But any signage that's proposed should conform to the ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. Questions for Chris on his report? Anyone? It was a lot of material. Thank you.
I'll get better next time. Shorten it up a little bit.
It was well done. Jack, Derek, any
Just
things?
one comment on the,
Yeah, Jack and Derek, let me swear you both in. To the extent you're providing testimony, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully?
I do.
I do.
So with the one recommendation for the parking stall to reduce it to 9 by 18, we recommended even if a variance was required. We're not sure if a variance is required. That was one of the changes in the ordinances that we revised just as Lee was leaving. But we're not sure if it's been published and fully adopted. So I think for the purpose of tonight, you would grant the variance, but it may not be necessary. And I think Chris covered all the other items.
Okay. Derek?
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay. Did you have questions for them? No. All right. I think
Good evening.
The applicant is up.
My name is Chris Tarr. I represent the applicant, and we'd like all to be sworn. Dan Barsky is on my left, your right, and Jim Kamalik is on my right. If we could all be sworn.
Okay, all 3 of you, yes. Gentlemen, to the extent you're providing testimony, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully? And would you state your name and respond?
Yes, I do. James Kamalak, Chmielak.
Yes, Chris Tarr.
Daniel Barsky, yes.
So, that was a very thorough planning memo, and we decided to use it as the basis for our presentation. As you know, Mr. Kamalik is a local professional engineer and planner and has been accepted by this board as such many times. And he has a series of slides. We've given Mr. Porter a hard copy set, and we'd ask that that whole deck be marked as applicant 1.
Yeah, let's mark that as A1, and as we go through, as you turn the pages, if you'd give those a number, a page number, so that we can identify them for the record.
On your screens, you'll see a number in the lower right-hand corner, but we'll try to make sure we continue to keep you current as to which slide we're on. As this slide indicates, this is in the business zone, and it's a mixed-use building, and As Mr. Cosenza indicated quite clearly, there are no variances required, but there are a number of recommendations that he's made. Or
Just 1 second, we're having a screen issue here, or I am.
Yeah,
Anyway.
this works.
yeah, it's behind you. That should be on your screen as well.
Oh, okay. Just a little
Okay. Jack, there's one, do you think you have to turn it on? That might do it. Okay. It helps if you turn it on.
The public can see that very large one over your shoulder. If needed, you just turn around and look at that one. Okay, so without further delay, if you're ready, we'll turn it over to Mr. Kamalik to go through the slides.
Good evening, everyone. As indicated here on slide 2, which is a copy of the tax map, you can see the subject property highlighted in blue. It's located on the east side of Witherspoon Street, across the street from the existing school. And here's an aerial view on the left, slide 3. So you can see the layout here of the existing lot with the existing structure, and on the right is a photograph of the existing dwelling currently located on the property. Overall, the property characteristics consist of the existing zoning, the B1 business district, where in this district the minimum lot size is just over 4,000 square feet. The lot area in this case is 8,500 square feet, almost twice the size of the minimum required. As you know from the materials that we submitted, it's a redevelopment of the existing 1.5-story frame dwelling. And then overall, in terms of the layout of the proposed building and the layout on the site, with the parking lot and the access, it is in keeping generally with the 2 adjacent office buildings on each side. The proposed project includes a commercial component, which is a 400 square foot office located at the front of the building on the first floor. It basically would serve as a professional office for, you know, an architect, an engineer, perhaps an attorney, a small commercial office. Additionally, the plan includes 3 residential apartments that are located on the first and second floors as you go towards the back of the building behind the front commercial space.
That was slide 4.
Yes, this is slide 4. The plan includes associated parking improvements, some utilities, drainage improvements, and landscaping and lighting, as previously testified to. No variants are proposed as part of the proposed plan, and a non-conforming front setback is being eliminated, with the building being located among the prevailing setback for the street. We've indicated here on slide 5 the proposed site plan with some color added where you can see the proposed building in the central portion of the lot in the yellow hatched color, which includes what we feel is an appropriate front porch, dressing up the front of the building, trying to keep into the architectural context of the street. We have an existing sidewalk access along the frontage where you would have a pedestrian access, as I'm highlighting here on 5, to the main front door of the commercial space. And then we have a sidewalk continuing on the right side of the building to enter residential unit 1, residential unit 2, and unit 3 at the rear. We have in the rear a parking area in an effort to comply with the ordinance, with 8 proposed parking stalls and an 11-foot drive aisle connecting Witherspoon Street with the rear parking area. Additionally, we have proposed landscaping to the maximum extent that we felt that we could, given the geometric limits of the property around the periphery of the parking lot, with the addition of both deciduous and evergreen plant material. Our plan does include compliance with the zoning bulk requirements as indicated here on slide 6. The column to the right shows that from a bulk standard standpoint in the B1 zone, that variance relief is not necessary for the application from the bulk standpoint. As previously mentioned, the parking as laid out on the plan does comply with the ordinance with 8 stalls proposed. I think on this one, it's important to keep in mind, as Mr. Tarr previously mentioned, that we have a commercial use which will require 2 parking stalls and will mostly be used during the working daytime hours. Alternatively, we have 6 additional parking stalls that we proposed that will be mostly used during morning, nighttime, and evening hours. So we do have a shift in terms of the parking demand on the property, and that does lend some flexibility, which I'll further touch on a little deeper here in the presentation relative to what Mr. Cosenza mentioned as to the total number of appropriate number of parking stalls for the property. Additionally, I've noted here on slide 7 that if the board would seek the recommendations of the professionals, we would certainly support a request for the slight reduction of the parking stall size to 9 feet by 18 feet, and then possibly on the parking stalls at the end of the parking lot, as mentioned, from 8 to 18 feet. And that would serve to limit impervious surface, additional pavement, and go to serve the general welfare of minimizing, overall drainage and stormwater conveyance. We prepared a drainage and grading plan as part of the property where we're conveying the roof water runoff as well as runoff from the parking lot to a stormwater management facility at the rear of the property. And that's indicated here on slide 8. Mr. West did have a couple comments about making a connection to the municipal system for the stormwater facility that's proposed, and we're certainly agreeable to doing that. In terms of the proposed building on slide 9, we've indicated the elevations as provided by the project architect. On the top of the slide, you can see the front elevation, which includes the overextending front porch on the first floor with that door entry to the commercial space. And it includes a balcony above that, which would be an amenity to the residential unit that is directly above the commercial space. On the lower side of the slide, you see a side view of the building, which reiterates that front porch, and then the accesses, the 3 accesses here to the residential units, as well as an additional access to the bike storage and a rear egress to the commercial space, which is at the front of the building. The building would consist of architectural shingles, as well as hardy plank type clapboard siding, with an effort to be in keeping with the construction and type and style of the other buildings on the Witherspoon Street corridor. Here's a closer view of the front elevation again, which I've discussed, and then the rear elevation, which is on the right-hand side of slide 10 here. Slide 11 shows specifically the left elevation, which is on the top of the screen, and then an additional copy of the right elevation on the bottom of the screen. Slide 11 just gives you a general layout of the floor plan.
12.
I'm sorry, on slide 12, the general layout of the floor plan, as I'm highlighting here, the first floor with the front entry, Then you can see this corridor space behind that, and then kitchen living room in the first residential unit, kitchen living room at the second residential unit at the rear, and then above that the second floor plan. The main second floor living space for the rear two units would be identical, and because of the fact that we have a first floor commercial space at the front of the building, as I'm highlighting on slide 12, there is a finished attic space which is referred to as a third floor plan for a limited footprint on the third story, as you can see here. And that's only in this case of the front unit, but for the rest of the building, the living space is limited to floors 1 and floor 2. So in terms of the staff reports, I can just go through quickly some of the comments, suggestions that were made, and clarifications that we can make as part of the plan to help you understand what we're seeking here. In terms of section 5.1 in the planning report, a common access driveway on the left side of the property was sought at the very outset of this project, and we saw that as a nice way to consolidate the entrances and provide a joint use. Currently, actually, the neighbor has a driveway on their property, and the driveway for this property is predominantly on the applicant's property. So it doesn't actually function as a joint driveway in the existing condition. There might be a slight couple of foot encroachment. They're still separate. The applicant did approach the owner and showed them some sketches of site plans with a joint access on the left side of the property in order to come to some agreement of sharing that and improving that for both properties. Unfortunately, they weren't able to reach an agreement to achieve that, and significant effort was put into having that cooperative effort. But given the fact that they couldn't reach an agreement to reconstruct that driveway in a joint manner, the applicant had no other choice but to look at the opposite side of the property. So we don't have two driveways next to one another, obviously, on the left side of the property here. And I can just pan back to the site plan just to mention a point. From that perspective, with the driveway on the right-hand side, if you're looking at it from the street, it is in keeping with the tempo and the harmony of the driveways in that immediate area where you have the structure on the left-hand side of the property and the driveway access on the right. And this does further that pattern, which does provide some landscape and planted areas in between consecutive driveways, which we see as an asset. So even though the effort was sought there on the north side and could provide some benefits, really had no other choice, but still this is in keeping with the rhythm of what's out there. Again, two separate driveways would result in distributing the trips, even though the trips in and out of the site will really be insubstantial because of the lack of density on the property. But distribute them on two driveways, we feel, would be an asset as opposed to having one driveway and all of those trips coming in and out on one single driveway. We feel that the overall intent of the project does comply with the Complete Streets policy. Generally, as sidewalks are provided along the frontage, which will be utilized by pedestrians and will be improved and reconstructed as part of the application. We'll also provide the additional pedestrian stop sign for vehicles to be alerted at the egress drive when they're leaving the property for the fact that pedestrians do on a daily basis use that frontage sidewalk. Lastly, we feel that this driveway configuration does improve the condition as the driveway is located further away from the school entrance drive than the existing driveway, where that existing driveway is closer to that intersection of the school entrance drive. This one is further away, and we think that that simplifies The movements in that area does provide an additional buffer and thus an asset. Section 5.2, parking spaces, just to clarify on slide 13, that indeed 400 square feet of office is proposed. I believe there was a typo of 529 square feet on the architectural plan. That was rectified with the board's professionals, and I'm just reiterating that we're talking about 400 square foot office. Additionally, the planner
Perhaps, excuse me. The statement about the driveway being further away from the school entrance drive, could you show the board what that means on
Sure.
slide 5?
the aerial.
It doesn't have the others. Oh.
All right. So here on the site plan, slide 5, as you can see, as I'm highlighting on the left, the school entrance drive is located here with the pointer. The existing driveway, as it exists today, is located here up into this area on the property, and we're proposing to locate it further away here. And that's what we were speaking about, providing an additional buffer at that location.
Thank you.
The last point on 5.2 for parking spaces, the board's planner suggested the possibility of for the reduction of impervious coverage and also the benefit of providing some additional landscape buffering and reducing the drive aisle from a necessary 27 feet wide to 24 feet wide, of possibly removing one stall, or possibly reducing the stall spaces to 8 feet wide instead of 9 feet wide. In this case, given the smaller general size of the lot, as well as the proposed 8 stalls that are included on the plan, and noting the fact that we'll have an opposite utilization time with the commercial office and the residential units, it would be my opinion that I feel that that would still provide sufficient parking on the property with that reduction of one stall if it was reduced from 8 stalls down to 7 spaces. And noting the limitations of the commercial office space and the fact that it's utilized during the day, that would more than be offset with availability of parking in that back area. So that would go a long way, I think, to fulfilling supporting the general welfare of reducing the overall impervious coverage and stormwater runoff and providing that additional landscape buffering.
Do you have a slide which shows how that would be reconfigured, or can you describe it with reference to the site plan?
Sure. I can refer back to slide 5 because I don't have a redesigned slide with that, but I could just highlight here again on 5 that the stall we're discussing is this end stall here. And I feel that with the parking sufficient with the remaining stalls, if this can be reduced, then this driveway in this area can be further reduced by several feet as well. And then we can further enhance landscaping in this area, as I'm highlighting on slide 5, back into the property line in this general area. So just looking for opportunities to be more efficient with what we're going to need. I certainly would support that if it was a desire of the board. Where were we? We were on slide 14. Slide 14, traffic generation section 5.3. I mentioned these points of the driveway location and the exit stop sign to alert pedestrians, section 5.4, parking spaces. We just discussed that possible reduction of one stall. Section 5.6, additional bicycle parking. We've already provided interior bicycle parking capacity because of the residential units. We feel with access of storage for up to 6 bicycles, which is reasonable and appropriate for those 3 units. And the applicant takes no issue with providing an additional small bike rack exterior to the building at a location on the property. So we can certainly amend the plans to add a small bike rack in addition to what's being proposed inside the building. Section 5.7, the access gates will be located along the parking lot side of the trash enclosure, and we did include a detail on the plan, which I can show you on the next slide here, which highlights generally, because of the efficiency of area that we're dealing with, where we have the enclosure at an approximate 4.5 foot depth. We'll have a double row here of recyclable containers and then a single row of trash containers. We'll have a few multiple gates on the front and need to do that just because of the geometric constraints. But if there are any questions about that access, that's how we addressed it, and they'll be easily accessible to all the areas there. Additionally, a private waste hauler, since this is a mixed-use building, will provide service to pick up the containers at the front of the building from the property on a weekly basis, which I believe is consistent with service in the local area. The public sidewalk, section 5.8, along the frontage will be replaced as requested by your engineer, and the applicant will include that stop pedestrian sign as requested. We noted that the landscaping compensation trees are not necessarily required as previously shown on the plan because the Shade Tree Commission did indicate that it was dead. Section 6.3, the applicant's willing to add that additional ornamental tree to the front yard as requested by SPRAB, and we know that the landscape plan and any additional landscaping or buffering as previously discussed would be reviewed and further coordinated with the landscape subcommittee. So should you approve this tonight, we'll work further with landscape subcommittee to get their input and finalize the landscape plan.
Just going back to 6.1, is that a statement that they're not going to be required, or you're going to do it even though they're not required?
We did propose a compensation tree on the plan. We're just clarifying the fact that we don't believe that it's actually required because the tree is dead. It's no longer viable.
But it is being one rather than the two?
We volunteered to put a tree in anyway.
As shown on the plan.
Okay, I think the reports requested two for that, but what you're proposing is one
Yes.
that is not required because the tree is dead.
Exactly. Section 6.6, the building lighting, all exterior lighting for the building will be LED. The temperature for that LED lighting is 3,000 Kelvin, and I believe that that's noted on the plan. The applicant is certainly willing to add an additional recessed light along the left portion of the front porch if that's desired, just to balance the lighting along that front facade there, to address that comment. Section 6.7, the applicant will provide a timer to the shoebox parking lot fixture so that it's basically on from dusk to approximately 10 p.m. and then is shut off from 10 p.m. through dawn of the next day on a regular basis. In this case, because of sensitivity to neighbors for light spillage, the applicant would prefer to stay with the shoebox fixture instead of a lantern type style in order to maintain the overall cutoff characteristics of that fixture. Section 7.1, surface water drainage. The applicant will provide the overflow pipe from the dry well system to Witherspoon Street, and additionally the 6-inch roof leader drain on the north side of the building will be connected at the corners of the building to eliminate that length of pipe between the property line and the north facade of the building. So we'll just rework that pipe to tie it in appropriately as suggested. Section 7.2, additional stormwater management measures. We were asked to investigate the feasibility of porous pavement for the driveway and parking lot. We did take a look at that for the full extent of the driveway and the parking lot. One of the challenges that we come up against is that on small sites like this, and especially in this case where the entry driveway as well as a decent portion of the parking lot at the rear is in close proximity to the building foundation, it's not recommended from the porous pavement design standpoint to have reintroduced surface water into groundwater in close proximity to the building foundation. That has its own issues with water infiltration and potential future impacts to the building. So from a traditional porous pavement standpoint, we're not seeking to pursue that avenue for those reasons. However, we think that we can make an accommodation to convert either 3 of the stalls, or if the board so chooses, 2 of the stalls at the end of the parking lot to vegetated paver blocks with grass growing through them. Perhaps they're used occasionally when needed, and this would serve to reduce the overall effective impervious coverage on the property. And we feel that we can add that measure, which would be an improvement in the reduction of the impervious coverage. And just to give you an idea on what something like that looks like, we've highlighted here, and you can see that the grass grows up through the paver blocks. It does provide some infiltration from the surface and provide some of that design intent from a sustainability standpoint. The building orientation, section 8.1, the applicant's architect did investigate the sideline proximity to the building and determined that a minor 1-foot shift of the building away from the northerly property line to the south would accommodate any necessary fire code requirements at that location. So, should the project be approved, we'll make that slight adjustment to the building footprint and just shift it slightly to accommodate that. In terms of signage, as previously indicated, the commercial use is limited in nature. It's not proposed, for retail use. It's more of a professional office type use. So no substantial signage is proposed at this time. We don't feel that it's really necessary or warranted. And certainly if any change comes of that in the future, the signage would comply with the sign ordinance. Some additional comments in addition to the planner's report that summarized 90% of the staff review. In the engineer and zoning report, section 4.0, I previously mentioned the reduction of the parking sizes as well as the removal of 1 stall. We're agreeable to that. 4.0J, all underground electric and communication will be underground. And the plans will be revised to show the 2-inch mill and overlay plus 6 inches in Witherspoon Street, which will be indicated on the engineering detail. Additionally, Mercer County recycling requirements will comply with the project. Performance guarantee will provide a fire department connection, if necessary, will be located as required by the fire official. That'll be determined at a future date when final construction plans are prepared by the applicant after an approval. And certainly, painted fire lane along the building can be provided at the requirement of the fire official. And if it is determined that a new hydrant is necessary to support an FDC connection subsequent to an approval by the board, the applicant's certainly willing to do that and proposes the method of doing that to post a bond for that purpose to pay for it. And we just request that the engineering department assist and coordinate with that installation of the new hydrant, just because we understand that an applicant may not be able to fully do that on their own, and they need to do that through municipal channels. So the applicant's certainly willing to provide it if it's required by the fire official to support an FDC connection, and would cooperate as necessary. We'll also put a note that LED bulbs would be included on the building-mounted lights and provide the necessary notation as to the sidewalk detail and the depths of pavement on the construction details. The Traffic Safety Committee comments that weren't mentioned, it was mentioned that at the driveway entrance, it would be preferable to have the capacity for 2 vehicles to be present at the driveway apron, one in the event one was coming in and one was going out, and widen that area to 16 feet to allow 2 cars to pass. The municipal engineer made the suggestion, and we can comply with that. We would make that change similar to the slide that you see on the screen and widen that to 16 feet at the front of the property in that location, so that we can have enough of a distance behind the sidewalk to accommodate that. So that summarizes, at least from my standpoint, the staff comments, the outline of the project, and trying to answer as many of questions I thought you might have.
In the Environmental Commission's report, they're proposing that one of the parking spaces have an EV charging station, which PSE&G, under its workplace charging program, provides free of charge. Any thought given to that?
We did think about that suggestion, and we discussed this at the SPRAB meeting, and what we came away with is, given the fact that we have 8 parking stalls and one of them is dedicated to ADA accessibility, it's an extremely small parking lot. To take another stall and solely dedicate it to EV use, we think would further reduce the available parking out of such a small number that you start with. And for, a sense of comparison, 900 Herrontown Road, we did an EV charging station, and we had some low-emission vehicle dedicated parking stalls scattered throughout the building area, and we had 125 parking stalls on that site. So at a number that's much larger, I think you can afford to implement that type of an improvement. But that's what we came away with, just since it's limited and you would want to keep that open and available for somebody. We didn't think that it was that applicable on this site.
So I can understand not having like a full charging station, but I think that, based off of some of my, professional work, it seems like EVs are going to be happening, and we need to be able to provide EV charging accessibility for not only workplace charging, but, for people who live in multifamily dwelling units. And so I think that, if you can offer charging stations, I think that would be at least a good gesture to have accessibility to, outlets or, plugs or extension cords that people could charge their cars with.
I understand.
That's fine. Access to exterior outlets.
Yeah, so something that, you could run an extension cord.
Yeah.
I mean, I think ideally, it would be, the building would be equipped for the proper voltage, which is, something that, should be looked into. But that would allow for level 2 charging.
So, as I recall it, the concern we had was this: it's wonderful that public service provides them for free. That's exciting, but because of that, we hear they're not the quickest at coming out to do it. It's very much like the fire hydrant. If the building is sprinklered, then there's an issue as to whether we need a hydrant, and that New Jersey American Water Company comes only when the municipality tells them to come, and only when they want to come. And the concern of the applicant is that whether it's an electric plug-in or it's the fire hydrant, that it not be a condition of the CO because it's out of the applicant's control. if we committed to approach PSE&G to ask them to put in a free plug-in, we would do that, but so long as we made a good faith effort, proved that we asked them and they hadn't come yet, we could still occupy the building.
Yeah, well, I mean, the workplace charging program through PSE&G it's a formal process, and you have to apply for it. I think that, you know, for the type of office unit that you're going to have, it's probably not the most logical approach to take. With all due respect.
So an
to the Environmental Commission.
But I think that what I'm suggesting is that the applicant commit to having accessibility to outlets that they, you know, EV owners could potentially run an extension cord to. But I mean, I think that, you know, I don't really think that it's that much more to equip the building for the proper voltage for level 2 charging.
The applicant's willing to do that and to look into the other, but again, the concern is that, like the fire hydrant, it not hold up occupancy.
I think Zenon's plan makes more sense than the standalone charging.
Go ahead.
I just had a clarification question in terms of the fire code and the side yard setback. You were talking about moving a foot away. Are you talking about narrowing the building by a foot, or are we talking about encroaching
No, we would
on
just
the...
shift it.
So
12
the
inches.
sidewalk would get narrower then?
We can take up some space. Well, we have a landscape area on both sides, one up against the building and then against the property line. So between those two, we feel that we can find the area that we need to make that work.
I will also say it looked like you had a lot of windows on that side, and even with the 3-foot setback, I'm not sure you're allowed to have those unless they're fire-rated glass. So just have your architect look at that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Could you just explain again the arrangement for the driveway? I remember the building to the north when it came in for site plan and the problems with the driveway of this property overlapping a little bit and so on. Has that been worked out? There's a fence along there now, but that's the other property owner's fence. Is that right?
There's a fence that exists now on slide 5 that is concurrent with the property line.
Yeah, and
that fence will stay. And the pavement, which is located on this applicant's property, is for a single parking stall pretty much on the south side, as I'm highlighting here with the pointer, of that property line. So that area would be removed and converted to landscape area, and then the apron adjusted at the frontage in order to accommodate that. So really this is, in my view, it's a neatening up of that driveway access, and still, as you can see, the minimum width for their driveway today is 9 feet, as we've dimensioned, and they have even a wider area as you get further to the front. So there's no excessive reduction by utilizing the applicant's property, for its own entirely own use at that location. And this would, serve to, in an orderly way, demarcate their driveway, convert, and the remaining portion of this lot. I think that'll be a benefit.
Louise?
Yeah, I have a few things. You said you were willing to go from 8 parking stalls to 7, and the one you'd lose, if you do that, which sounds good to me, would be on all the way on the lower right of that image. And the two next to it, just above it, would be where you'd put the vegetated pavers. Is that correct?
Yes.
So those pavers would not have a curb so that they could also drain or sort of share drainage with the green space that's next to it? Or would we require, I guess this is partly a question for the engineer.
No, I believe that we would,
curb between those 2 parking spaces and the the vegetated area that's going to be there instead of that.
I understand what you're saying, and we'd have to take a look at it, because one of the concerns and the reason we're asking them to move the drainage outlet from the back to the front is because we've experienced some drainage problems in the back of that property and the back of the properties on Carnahan. So we're trying to keep the water away from that area. They do have a catch basin that's going to be in that island, right in that area where he's got highlighted. You have an inlet there.
Right.
So if there was a way to swale it, the overflow into that, possibly, but we are trying to control the water to keep it away from the properties in the rear.
Well, then the lower right area, which will be vegetated, might be a place for a tree that loves water also.
Yep.
And which
Right.
would be a
That's-
good thing to have, next to those parking spots too. So that's one thought. And I also, as to the driveway entrance and the suggestion that it be widened to 16 feet to accommodate people coming in and out, I'm just not sure that it's still doesn't look like it would make it very easy for two vehicles to be there at once, one going in and one going out, and I'm not sure it's worth the aesthetic cost as well as the additional impervious cover. So my preference would be to continue with the image. Oh, it's actually
That's
not
the-
as bad as I thought, but I still think the narrower space is probably, I don't know, maybe design professionals obviously some have a different view, but I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it.
I think I
And
kind of
I just
agree.
had one other thing, but it can wait.
I'll just pipe in on that it may be difficult to get the outgoing driver to occupy that widened section of the driveway, and if somebody doesn't shift over at the last minute there, then you don't have the extra space for the incoming car anyway. So I tend to agree with
I think
that.
they'd still end up doing it one at a time.
Yeah, I don't.
Somebody's going.
And the other last question I had was whether or not, this is a much broader question having to do with the Witherspoon corridor, which is changing and begs for a study of it and planning effort of its own. But absent that, have you prepared or could you prepare a rendering or an image that shows this new building in the context of what's around it in terms of scale and character and that kind of thing?
One of the things we did is as I mentioned, we identified what the prevailing setback is along Witherspoon, along the front, and we served to match that. Additionally, on the plans, you'll see that we provided a cross-section of the building, looking at it from the front with reference to the heights of the adjacent buildings. And you can see that it's generally in keeping with the overall building height with the two structures on each side. So, those are it's a small property. We know that maybe grander designs of Witherspoon Street haven't manifested themselves just yet, but within this limited 8,000 square foot lot, we really tried to relocate the structure so that it was appropriate, and then from a height standpoint match that as well. And then from a aesthetic standpoint, the architect did take a look at the neighborhood and incorporate elements from the local neighborhood in terms of the roof lines and the pitch and things like that. So, but that's the extent of the work that was done.
Anyone else? Yes, David?
I just had one additional thing that I wanted to maybe get a little bit of input from Jack on. I like the idea of eliminating one of the parking spaces, partly because I think there's an opportunity to help clean up the circulation in the back a little bit, because right now you've got several spaces that really have multi-point turning that they have to do, K-turns or W-turns, or I'm not sure exactly what they're going to be to get out of there, get turned around. And so I guess I don't know what the solution is immediately, but I would urge you, as you look at reconfiguring those rear 3 spaces into 2, that it not simply be an elimination of that one space that you were pointing at, because I think that wouldn't solve any of those circulation problems for the at least 3 remaining spaces towards the end there. Whereas if you centered the 2 spaces instead of pushing them up towards the long row of cars, it might help clean up the circulation.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on the driveway and the larger entrance versus the smaller entrance, and pick up actually on something that was in the report about the proximity to Community Park, because I know that in the morning at least, I tend to travel that, and some parents do drop off children on that side, on the right-hand side of Witherspoon, heading down. So I like the idea of trying to make it as safe as possible with traveling, with children going back and forth. So I wonder if making the entrance larger would allow for at least having cars get off Witherspoon during the times when there are children either going to Community Park or leaving. So I wanted to sort of pick up off of the idea that was in the report and see what you have to say. Think
That
about
was the thought, was that, 2 cars, 16 feet is not real wide, and as I think it was David mentioned, the issue is the car leaving kind of has to go to the right to get over far enough. So I think I'm on the fence as far as whether it's necessary or not. All the other driveways on all the other commercial properties you can see next door, they only have 9 feet. This actually is going to be less intense because it's residential units with a small office. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary, and it wasn't a strong opinion of traffic safety. It was something that was mentioned. So I don't know that it's really helps that much.
Okay, if there are no more board questions right now, I think we could open this up for public comment. I know a number of people have sat here very patiently, so if you get about 3-4 minutes, come up, give us your name, get sworn in. Doesn't sound like it at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Owen Leach. Do I have to?
Yes. To the extent you're providing testimony, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Leach.
My wife Beverly and I have owned 293, 295 Witherspoon, which is the house with the white picket fence, otherwise known as the grandchild retention device in the front yard, 2 doors down from this site plan. We've owned it since 1993. And in 2012, we converted it from a duplex to a single family with a rental flat and began to live there ourselves. We are one of 10 dwellings between Henry Avenue and Guyo Street on this side of Witherspoon. And I am quite concerned about the, quote, overall fit of this structure into the neighborhood. The applicant, in talking to you, discussed the front setback and the height, but did not discuss the back of the dwelling. Most of the houses, and again, this I can't tell you exact to the foot, but typically 2,500 to 3,000 square feet is what those 10 properties would average. This is 4,365, I believe, and the extent to which it goes to the back is we were told in the briefing session, about 60 feet. And the typical house now is more square. Ours, for instance, is 2,604 square feet, and it's 32 by 38. And this 60-foot length is going to dramatically change the prevailing line on the backs of all these houses. Now, permitted, unpermitted, I don't know, but it's definitely going to impact how we see our neighborhood. And I ask that you consider that. The 4365 square footage is roughly 75% greater than what I think is the prevailing square footage in this section of Witherspoon Street. That's much bigger. The other issue, which I'm pleased to say was somewhat addressed, was the notion of the parking lot lighting. The tower light, and tower's a good word for it, at 14 feet over the parking area, as I now understand it, would be turned off at 10 o'clock. That's good news, as opposed to all night long, or even worse, motion detected, which goes on and off and can wake people up. I would only ask, as the property owner whose property is 50 feet away from that light tower, that there be possibly additional light baffling more than just the box itself, something to come down so that we don't see a naked bulb. And with that, I thank you for all the attention you give to these projects. My goodness, the detail you deal with is most impressive, and I appreciate how you concentrate and think it through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jeff Fury, 319 Witherspoon Street. We've been there for 20 years.
Mr. Fury, could you just be sworn in?
Yes. To the extent you're providing testimony, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully?
I do.
Thank you.
As I was saying, we've lived there for 20 years, and we do have some concerns. First, about the LRK memo that I guess the township engineers, that I saw in the thing that I guess the township engineers hires. There is, they point out that there's parking and traffic conflicts with the CP school. So to reduce the parking, when your engineers that you hired, said there could be a potential parking thing, to reduce it, I would encourage you to ask them to use the power pavers on those 3 spots. Then there's grass, you're concerned about that. And that would help, with the drainage, something of that, with that. Next thing, I do want to talk about the lighting. I have a concern about that. I recall when the town topics came in, and we were 3 houses away or properties away, and basically those lights from the town topics parking lot did light up our lot. When they put up the fence, we didn't get anything, and I understand a fence is going to be put up. I like to know the height of the fence. Will it be comparable comparable to the town topics fence? And also, what are the heights of the lights? Because I believe when I looked at the plans this week, that the plans that RB is with their lighting is the exact same type of lights that the town topic has. It looks like they're very, not exact, very similar. So, same height, especially with the concern of our neighbors. I would like to, I'm very concerned about that. Okay, also the LED lighting is brighter and all. I'm in commercial real estate, and it gives a much greater light. And I have parking lots, and yes, it's great. Much more visible, much more safer, but they are bright and in a residential area. So whatever you could do to lessen the effect to the neighbors would be greatly appreciated. And in finishing, I am concerned about diminishing value of a negative impact the area of this single family neighborhood. Every property, and this is for the future too, will want the same considerations initially set by the town topics in their change from basically residential to commercial. And this is really commercial building and apartment building proposed. And clearly not consistent with the adjacent area to a neighborhood elementary school. We have a neighborhood elementary school. I testified back then with the town topics. I would count the kids that come by with their parents, and you'll get 50 to 100 kids on a morning walking to school. That's the beauty of a neighborhood school. And I just, we want to keep the neighborhood consistent. Thank you very much, and love to hear what you come up with.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Beverly Leach, 295, 293 Witherspoon. Mr. Porter, you want me to?
Yes. Ms. Leach, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this application to the
I do.
extent you're providing testimony?
I do.
Thank you.
I'd just like to lend my support to the comments already made. They're just spot on as far as I'm concerned. And I think the design has taken into account a very nice front-on look, but when you look at the sides and the rear of the building, to me they are incredibly tall, and the applicant will say they're not 3 stories, but in fact, cosmetically, virtually, they are, even though they're not inhabited on the 3rd floor. And we're going to, when we look up and down, we Witherspoon neighbors are going to see this huge monolith, as will the Carnahan neighbors to the back when they look to their backyard. And I wonder if there's some way that could be lowered, since that's not entirely used space except for mechanicals and things like that. But what I wanted to talk about today was the sustainable aspect of it, and I'm very heartened to hear so many comments in favor of that sort of thing, and Ms. Wilson in particular. Coincidentally, I yesterday got these pamphlets from the Jackson Witherspoon Neighborhood Association, which apparently is devoting their next meeting to a discussion of sustainable neighborhood. It's a concern that everybody has, and we all know, our mayor tells us we're all aspiring to sustainable Princeton, and she hopes that every policy and everything that happens through government keeps that in mind. And everybody running for office at the top of the list is sustainable, environmentally sensitive considerations. My concern is for the asphalt that's going to be spread even more in our neighborhood. As I count it, approximately half of the backyards in that stretch are devoted to asphalt-covered parking lots. And it's good to hear that there are some suggestions for alleviating a little bit of that. But I think we're at a moment in time where we have an opportunity to face this and what it means in the future. We have seen in the last few years an increase in the strength and the frequency of water events in our area. We have discovered much more than a few years ago, when we have these big 3-inch rains, we get water that percolates up through our basement floor to the point where we have now put in a second sump pump to deal with that greater amount and greater frequency of water. And the reason is, as Houston found out a few months ago, they paved over the whole town and there's no place for the water to go. You know this, you've already addressed this tonight, but I hope there is some way to consider that when we look at this big parking lot, which is the size it is because we have a 3-unit apartment house plus a business in the front. Does it need to be that big? It's out of keeping with the neighborhood, and it's adding a lot of impervious surface to what is already too much. When the other parking lots were paved, we didn't have the same sensitivity that we do now to the situation. And as a gardener, I just want to say, too, I have seen another result of that in the trees that have died, and I understand there's one dead tree on this property as well. What happens is the water has no place to go, and the porous, good earth is in limited supply, and the water all pools around that area where the trees are growing, and consequently on both sides of us we have seen trees die, I would submit, because of too much water sitting there and the roots are rotting and the roots are not strong enough to hold up. I don't know what you can do about it. My only suggestion is maybe this is a moment for the future as we aspire to be more sustainable in town, and we think again about what your requirements are for paving over property. Maybe the suggestion they made for the pavers with the grass and so forth in between them is an idea to expand farther into parking lots. I would hope, too, that the Shade Tree Commission, that does a very good job in selecting specimens and things for us, would also really address that question when they explore all of this. So it's a new moment. You know, we all heard about paving paradise by putting up a parking lot. Maybe this is the moment to really address what that all really means to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Yaina Moore of 19 Green Street.
Ms. Moore, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully to the extent you're providing testimony?
I certainly do.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you. I am here because the neighbors of this area are very concerned about the future of what is a single-family neighborhood. And while this development and a couple that have preceded it have fit the zoning requirement, I want to ask the planning board, is this your vision for this neighborhood, to essentially change it to multifamily commercial type of structures, because it puts at risk what has been talked about as the neighborhood that is adjacent to our elementary school community park, and it really changes the kind of environment that it's within. As president of the Witherspoon-Jackson Development Corporation, we're looking at how Witherspoon develops. This particular site is not necessarily within the historic district, but the neighborhood really extends beyond that with many other historic references. This particular house was owned by and lived in by the Waxwoods, and that was Mr. Waxwood, who was the principal of Quarry Street School. It is unfortunate that it has to leave the stock of single-family homes for the neighborhood. I don't know what the tenure type is that's suggested for these three residential units, whether they will be condo or whether they will be rental. Obviously, there's nothing that has to be accommodated in terms of affordability, but it will change the quality of the neighborhood for those residents who are already there, including a counselor, Lance Lieberman, who lives at the corner and owns one of the properties. It's unfortunate he wasn't able to come today. But I think the neighborhood wants to know, where are you headed? I know there have been a lot of zoning considerations around residential neighborhoods. I don't know that this one was really even considered that, even though it is in a pre-existed mode. Was a residential neighborhood with mixed commercial, more of the type that was small scale, owner-occupied business, at-home businesses. That's no longer being encouraged, the type of zoning that exists there today. And I think the planning board needs to address whether this is where you want to go with this entire strip, which is the business one district. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Hearing none, let me close the public portion. I'm glad that Yana Moore mentioned that this had been Mr. and Mrs. Waxwood's house. This was a consideration when the historic district was put in as to whether or not the houses on this side of the street should be considered, and weren't. So, you know, there are other sites that could be added to the neighborhood. I'm not suggesting that this one is going to happen now or tonight, but it's one of the things that your organization should keep in mind as you're going along, because you do lose neighborhood history if you don't constantly keep an eye out for it. And having said that, are there any more questions or comments? Louise?
I do have some follow-up questions about the zoning and the implications of the good work that Looney Ricks and Kiss has done with regard to neighborhood character and zoning. And because I'd love to see us, and I know this is not required now, but it's a good opportunity to say that when we do have basically a tear down and new use situation, it would be great to require the applicant to show us what it's going to, really show us the impact, the visual impact from the street, from the neighbors. And I think it would just be helpful, but if the zoning in place permits what's proposed, then that's a different matter. We can have all the images we want, and what it looks like and how it affects the overall character is irrelevant if the zoning allows it. So that leads to my other question, I guess, which is, are any of the changes that are envisioned to land use ordinances, would they address this kind of situation, or are we moving toward a form-based code kind of situation where an applicant that wants to tear down and rebuild this building and on this in this part of the neighborhood, how would that change, I guess I'm asking? And I realize it's a difficult hypothetical, but I'm throwing it at you anyway.
That's fine. So the intent of the residential form-based code project from the very beginning is to address some of the tear-down rebuilds, neighborhood character related to single and two-family dwellings only. To that point, I don't disagree with the comments you made, and I think the planning board should look at ways to consider ordinances or performance standards that address non-residential uses and multifamily properties within the areas that buffer single-family and two-family zones. So to answer your question, that effort would not really impact this, but we should consider expanding it in some other way that addresses non-residential and multifamily projects like these.
Well, and I think, I'm sorry, David, I know you're about to say something, but I think that there has particular relevance and resonance in the Witherspoon corridor because of the very wide range of uses and sizes of buildings and the history and all of that. So I'm also curious about when this section was first zoned for business. Has it been a business zone for a long time? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I just had a follow-up. What are the boundaries of the B1 zone in that neighborhood? How far does B1 extend along Witherspoon? Does it in?
It goes up close to that gas station, and then it goes down almost to the school, past Connie's, and that's.
So the existing residences that farther down, like Mr. Councilman Liverman's house, is in the
yes.
B1 zone.
Yeah, I mean the rest of Witherspoon is in the part that's in the borough is in the R4 zone and the RB zone, which is a somewhat restrictive commercial zone, and it's in a historic district, so that will provide a few, tamping of the brakes with development in that section. But it's a good point that I know several years ago there was a Witherspoon corridor study, but other issues became more burning issues, and we diverted our attention to them. But it is something that needs to be looked at, and Chris's comments were well put.
And a question for the applicant. So you showed that a couple of the spaces would have greenish parking stalls, and you've heard the concerns of neighbors about runoff and about the general sort of high amount of impervious cover in that neighborhood. I mean, this site is surrounded on either side by 8 6-bay parking lots. Would you consider extending that treatment to the entire site, or how would that work?
I think from the standpoint of the pervious pavers, it would be our position to utilize those in a portion of the site, just from an overall, usability and maintenance standpoint, snow plowing, et cetera. I think over a larger expanse, it could present some issues. So in order to increase the infiltration and decrease the impervious surface, I think it's a good solution, on a limited basis since it's such a small lot. But we do have some concerns about, making it parking lot wide. And again, we do need to stay away from, the foundations of the building to not negatively impact that.
Yeah, and the comment I wanted to make was also addressing Mrs. Leach's concern, just to reassure you that as a town, we are looking at ways to try to really address reducing impervious coverage, both by changing our parking requirements to require less parking spaces when that would be appropriate, to look at ways to require or at least encourage green infrastructure, which means more natural ways to handle stormwater rather than these sort of gray water systems that, just put it in a tank and then let it go, after cleaning it. So we're sensitive to the concerns that you were mentioning, and I think that on this particular application, we're nibbling at the corners of trying to improve the situation, but we're looking at taking more comprehensive action in the coming year.
Anything else?
One of the comments was the size, or the height of the sides of the building, and above what looked like the third floor, there was unusable space. The question that was raised was there a design that could lower the appearance of the height? 'Cause
So I believe Jim's testimony was that, just so that you're clear, in the third floor, only the front apartment goes up into that space because there's the commercial space below it. At the back, looking at the slide there, it shows nothing, or a void. In fact, the roof goes back on a pitch, but there's nothing in it. There's no habitable space within it. And we talked with the neighbors a while ago. The alternative would be a flat roof, which is dreadful to maintenance and so forth. So we just maintained the ridge straight back, and yet it is attic space. It's not even storage space. There's mechanical equipment up there. There's no way to lower it as we understood it.
to change the slope of it, and
To take show the elevation from the front. Right, again.
that's the front, but the side, I guess, was the comment. You look at the side elevation.
The pitch, the ridge is where the ridge is. If you look at it from the side, it's still a ridge.
It's the side view.
Yeah.
The one suggestion I have is that you could conceivably hip the back end of the roof instead of having a gable there. It would relieve the mass a little bit from the view from the backyards of the neighboring. I don't think it makes a big difference, and stylistically it's not really the right thing to do for this building,
Right.
but that's the one design change I could think of that would relieve
The windows to the back there, the two windows that you see in the roof itself are there for cosmetic purposes, just to make it look nicer.
Ms. Ullman?
Yeah, I think the Leaches and Yana and all of you have pointed out exactly the issue of what is going to be happening on Witherspoon Street. Willy-nilly, there's going to be more pressure on that street than almost any in town to do infill type of housing. There's an enormous demand in town for that. I guess, in my personal opinion, this works pretty well. It's adding apartments, which apparently there's a great need for. They will be presumably in a more moderate price range than they would be if they were individual houses. I mean, the town has been zoned over years for single-family houses. I think that's going to be changing over the next couple of decades. We can forestall it to some extent where we need to, but I think we need to be paying more attention to how we do it, where we do it, what it looks like. Witherspoon Street, we tried to have I don't know what even happened to that plan. It's already got about 17 zones up and down it. We never got them coordinated. We did manage to set a preservation element over most of the west side of Witherspoon Street. But this side is already pretty commercial. And once we built Avalon Bay, we knew that there were going to be additional changes that came to Witherspoon Street. This is a good example of maybe the first type of that. I think it's a pretty well-designed structure. I think it makes a lot of accommodations for parking. I think it gives us what we need in terms of additional residential space of a moderate price. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're arguing. You're arguing that there won't be a modest price for the apartments?
I'm sorry.
We don't have any information about that. The
Well,
size of it will be
there are-
somewhat,
there are-
will determine the price.
There are 2.5 baths in each unit. We up the street have a small apartment, 2 bedrooms, living room, basement, 1 bathroom that rents for $2,200, and we are overwhelmed with people who would pay more than that. And Avalon Bay, as you know, is higher than that. So I don't think it's
Well,
necessarily moderate.
I suspect that they will be less expensive than a single-family house there.
Oh, certainly.
I think that actually the public participation period is over. So if I could ask you to sit down.
But I mean, I think you're right to be concerned. I think we need to study the whole of the street to figure out what we want. But I can tell you there's going to be enormous pressure there over the next decade.
Well, I think I agree with Mrs. Alma. The pressure is going to be there, and it's already started, and I think it's up to Princeton's council and to its planners to really do something soon rather than wait. So, having said that, and I must say that I always look at these things and I regret everything that's torn down in Princeton, and right now I'm regretting that post-war, mid-century, modern, modest little buildings are going to all disappear, and this one had a certain charm to it, but I think that it fits the zoning and it does supply a need. So with that, anyone else? Yes.
Regarding the question of lighting, there was, I believe, a suggestion that the applicant ensure that the light or lumens or overall warmth and that the light not be too hot, too bright, and that the fixture itself perhaps be lowered some, just an extreme sensitivity to light bleeding over into other. Can we speak to that a little bit?
I think the applicant, the neighbor, was concerned about the specific light spillage to his site. So I don't know if there's a way to shield that below the box so he wouldn't be affected
Does it
by
have to be a 14-foot high tower fixture?
the applicant.
The goal of the lighting was to provide enough lighting in the parking area, and what we wanted to try to do is minimize the number of lights, because we know lighting is sensitive to the neighbors. Number one, minimize the number. So we proposed 1, where the neighboring property has at least 3. Then we chose the shoebox fixture that aims down, where the neighboring property has a lantern fixture that aims outward. And then we tried to push that fixture not at the rear property line, but as far down the sideline as we could, so as to get away from the residences on Witherspoon, and noting the fact that there's an asphalt parking lot right behind that light. So there's not a building right at that location. So those were the design intents that went into it. But I can say, in an effort to address the concern, that we can amend the plan and provide a note that a house side shield be added to that fixture to provide some additional protection on the back and the 2 sides on the revised plan, to just give some additional insurance to cut that light down.
And just one other condition on the lighting that was indicated. I believe the applicant has agreed that the light will be shut off at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
So I don't know if we're done with the lighting conversation, but before we kind of move to vote or whatever the next step is, I just wanted to follow up on the EV charging station. And so I don't know if I don't think it needs to be a condition of occupancy, but I think that could be a condition of, terms of approval or one of these kind of conditions we put on it. But I really think that having a charging station, for the occupants of the building available, at least for 2 spots, I think would be a great addition to it. I think that having the option for the residents to be able to charge or have an EV, first of all, but be able to charge their EV, I think is a really important one, because we need to have those options for people as we transition to electric vehicles. And so I think that it's it doesn't have to be a charging station in terms of like the one in McCaffrey's where you pay. It's a typical smaller charging for residential or for kind of multifamily that could work on a kind of smaller scale, and those are much more affordable.
So we were talking a moment ago about a plug that the car could plug into. You've changed your mind?
Well, I think at minimum having accessibility to an outlet, I think is...
We're okay with that.
But I think that, having kind of, I was looking at a few models that, they're outdoor, basically formal charging stations for EVs. They typically run anywhere between $500 and $1,000. And, they can sit between 2 spots.
My recollection was some of the brands have different chargers, and so if somebody had an electric car, it'd be fine with us if they wanted to buy a charger and set it by that space or put it inside their unit and bring it out to charge their car. But I don't know that there's a universal charger.
Yeah, there's universal chargers. Right. So.
Right.
They're adapters,
right.
Yeah.
So, right. Right. So as Daniel's pointed out, he'd be delighted to provide electric circuitry out that far, provide a plug on the side of the building for folks who could use standard power, and the circuitry could accommodate that as and when a demand arose.
Well, yeah, I guess if it was, regardless of whether it was a formal charging station or just an outlet, I think that we should try to at least have 240 voltage. I was trying to get the voltage that would be allowed for level 2
That's all
charging.
good. And in fact, we'll take Mr. Quinn's suggestion up and ask Public Service if
Yeah, and
there's a free charging station.
I did look at that, and so you probably would be able to apply for the workplace grant.
As long as it doesn't interfere with the occupancy, we're willing to try to get it on the list.
But I think it's really critical that we allow for that flexibility for people to be able to own EVs in these units.
Because sustainability came up and because it's in the environmental memo, we neglected to point out that we are going to have Energy Star in all respects and Water Sense labeling, plumbing fixtures, LED inside and out, and in response to the questions on page 2 of the Environmental Commission memo.
Great.
Is it necessary in this charging, whatever we're calling it, for it to be dedicated? Because that was one of the issues with the small size parking lot.
I don't think so. I don't think it needs to be dedicated. I think that, if these people own EVs, they can kind of work amongst themselves. Maybe you could put some signage, preference, but
there's only 3 folks. If somebody has an electric car, I bet they can work it out.
Right. I think that, frankly, from a branding perspective, if you want to get the Tesla crowd into your,
into your affordable housing,
or the Leaf
definitely
crowd,
not the affordable housing, but
or the Leaf crowd.
Is that clear
enough? We'll work that out. But there's still an issue of whether the access dimension is to be widened or not. That it's been discussion, applicants willing to do it, plus the board. I think we need to get a consensus of the board as to whether we want that area widened.
Those of us who spoke did not want it widened. There may be some who didn't speak who do want it widened, but
so I guess if it's not in the condition that it's widened, it's what is shown.
Yeah.
We've shown it on the slide you're looking at. If you want it, fine. If you don't want it, fine.
Well, I'm just asking the board to tell what it wants.
Right.
Well, my feeling about this is, because I walk down here almost every other day, that if you make it wide enough, people will use it as a drop-off point for the school and just pull in there. So I would say leave it narrower, because people do use the driveways for that.
Okay, I'm not hearing support for widening it, so that won't be a condition unless someone moves it further. What does compliance with the affordable housing require?
Thank you, Derek. Contribution.
So a condition will be compliance with
Comply with
whatever
the
the existing ordinance requires.
Right.
One note about widening. I know that this would potentially bring up a whole larger discussion, but one thing that came up in PEC when we were reviewing this site was, if you just simply flipped the site plan and had the driveway on the other side, that would, because then you'd have potentially kind of a shared driveway situation where you have actually access potentially both
Very
ways.
sore topic. The neighbor is not interested.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess we talked about reducing the light spillage by putting shields, additional shields on the shoebox. We talked about shifting the house the building a foot off. We talked about reducing impervious.
Mr. Porter?
Hmm?
May I speak up? Madam Chairman, I guess you call?
Well, the public portion is over, so I think
Well, you allowed this one lady to speak.
she just jumped up and said her piece.
Why? I'm asking.
What do you want?
All I ask about the lighting is lower the lights, comparable to what the town topics is. They're probably in the 10 to 12 foot range. If you notice, town topics lights are all over there. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You'll probably cut it down to 3 or 4. But if they lower the lights.
Right. We'd be willing to study that. You heard testimony, one light centrally located with shields we thought was better than 6 lantern lights spraying light all over the place. We've thought about it. The engineer worked on it hard. We'll study an alternative, but prefer to stick with a 14-foot pole with a shoebox top with shields.
Anyone? Comments?
Alan, I may have missed it. Did you get to that fire hydrant yet, or the fire hydrant? You didn't get
You're
there?
going to work with the fire department officials about whether there is one or isn't one,
And if one has to be installed, then the municipality will assist in asking New Jersey American for it, because we're not allowed to.
Let me clarify the hydrant. Actually, if one is required, the municipality requests it, and it's installed at no cost. So,
And his
if
question
the fire official would like one, then it's actually the fire official that makes the request.
his question was, does the presence or absence of the fire hydrant delay the certificate of occupancy?
No.
Okay.
I think there's a whole set of issues with respect to number one, are the number of parking spaces going to be reduced from 8 to 7? And if so, should we leave the whole design of that and the planting and the curbing and the configuration to the approval of the applicant working with the municipal engineer?
We're coming back to landscape subcommittee. We could look at it again there.
Well, landscape subcommittee and design of the spaces were.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We get to the issue of, I guess we're now talking about reducing parking sizes, reducing number of parking spaces, which introduces 2 variances.
Actually,
Correct?
potentially 3.
The third is,
So there's one is to reduce the stall to 9 by 18, which we're not, it may not be a variance, but we're not sure the status. So the second would be, there was talk about reducing the width of some of the stalls to 8 feet wide to accommodate compact spaces.
But that's not really, there's no reason to do that if we reduce the
Okay,
count.
then that one would be out, and then there would only be 2, and the second one would be for eliminating 1 space.
right, so it's either 2 or 1, depending on whether
That's correct.
dimension requires a variance. Okay, so that's part of the application or the what the board would be voting on. Was there any consensus on reducing the impervious through pavers or otherwise beyond the landscaping, beyond those 2 parking spaces, with the understanding that what would be done would not impact or adversely impact the foundation of the building? Jack, did you have a...
I think the applicant only agreed to do the 2 spaces with the grass pavers.
Right.
The concern was snow plowing and just general maintenance.
Right.
So I think that's all the applicant agreed to.
Right, but is the board requesting more?
I would point out, perhaps for future reference, that permeable asphalt is an excellent super infiltrating option and does not require intensive maintenance and actually eliminates the danger of black ice in parking lots when it's in parking stalls. So I understand your reluctance to move the grass pavers closer to the building, whether it's this application or a future one. Maybe those, 2 or 3 stalls on the top part of the picture that are away from the building would be great candidates for that, especially since it seems like the property slopes that way a little bit. But I know we haven't talked about that. I'm not trying to throw you a curveball at the last minute, but it may very well get you where you need to be in terms of stormwater management on site.
We think we're technically where we need to be. We discussed this among ourselves to literally bring in pervious pavement for 3 parking stalls is really expensive. And you ought to have a discussion among yourselves about the drive aisles. And engineers have told you from time to time that in the drive aisles where the cars, power steering turns the tires, it rips up the pervious. So it could only be in those spaces. 2 of them we're going to put in grass pavers. Then you'd have just 3 spaces where there was a pervious pavement. It's not economically feasible.
Okay.
Could you remind me which 2 spaces, since the diagram's up? So with these 2. Okay, thank you. Could we get a third, sort of up here? I don't have the pointer, but it seems like it's far enough away from the building.
No, up at the top by the grass, by the trees there, by the grass. We could take a look at it. Again, it would be by itself, and
Is that going to drain into a bioswale anyway? Those spaces up to the...
Yes, it's proposed to drain to
Yeah, so it's draining into green
a
stormwater
vegetated
infrastructure
feature. Yeah.
practice, so it's not like you require that to infiltrate what the stormwater that spot's going to generate. I know I'm arguing against myself now, but but it's
good. It's good.
Way past my
I would suggest that, if they're going to study anything, it would be leave the 3 spots on the end and make those grass pavers and remove one from the side. But I don't know whether that makes any sense or not. But you look at the way it lays out, because that actually could reduce, it could really increase your green space at the end.
Right.
If you reduce the long row of spaces and.
Well, I
We'll
think
study it.
what we're saying is, at this point, it's just the
It's coming
several-
back to the landscape subcommittee, I think.
But that you're free to make it better.
That's our goal, always.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that and the conditions that are indicated in the reports that the applicant has requested would be the motion to grant preliminary and final major site plan approval with one or two variances.
I assume that you all made note of all these conditions, and someone is willing to make a motion at this point. Want to make a motion?
I'll motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right. Carrie, if you would call the roll on this one, please.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes?
Yes. The motion has passed.
Move we adjourn?
All right.
Second.
David, would you like to? Tim did it? Oh, someone has to second it. There was all in favor? Yes. Like what, right? Do you want them right?